Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much, Claudio, for joining us today. Um, Claudio, our next guest, is a law student who's currently in the Global Professional Master of Laws program at the University of Toronto. Claudio actually reached out to me to interview me for one of his podcasts called Studying Law Around the World. And I actually turned that shotgun around and pointed it right back at him because I've been following Claudio for a while. And I've seen some of his posts on LinkedIn. I thought he was an interesting person to interview. I also met Claudio during one of your classes at UofT Law, right? So I was co-facilitating the negotiations class. He approached me during one of the breaks. We had a small chat. And truly, I'm very impressed at what you're doing. And I think that you'd be a great role model for other internationally trained lawyers who are trying to break into the market in Canada. And so thank you so much for joining us. I'm really happy that we're here and we get a chance to sit down and talk. And I'd like to talk about some of your projects with you.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invite, Liran, and I'll be happy to share a few of my insights, a little bit about my story. But really appreciate your time and the willingness to interview me here today.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Let's start a little bit about you. So tell me, where are you from, and where did you study law initially?
That's right. So I'm originally from Brazil. That's where I grew up, and that's where I did my law degree. So that's where everything started. Basically, as most countries, I guess, outside of North America, in Brazil, we get out of high school and can get straight into law school. So that was my path. And early on, I had a desire to do something international with my career. So basically, finished high school, started law school, and then I got the chance to go to the US for a 2-year volunteer mission, and then came back home and went to continue law school. And the first thing I did was to go talk to the dean in my faculty to ask about how can I make my degree as international as possible. And basically the response I got was, hey, you should go do something else, do engineering, do some other course, because law is not the best option for you if you want to do something international. So that's the first thing I've heard.
Interesting. Is it because of was the suggestion because of the difficulty in converting that degree and getting licensed in different jurisdictions? Is that why?
I do believe so. Yeah, I think it came from like a good intention from like understanding how the different systems work and all. And also I feel like, back in 2018, it hasn't been that long, but we just didn't have as much, or at least in my bubble, right? There weren't as many people talking about how you could become a lawyer elsewhere, or what's the process to become a lawyer in another place. It felt like something that was very hard and very far away from reality.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, Brazil is a civil law jurisdiction. And so, what brought you to the University of Toronto? What brought you to the common law side of the world?
Right. So that is a little bit of a long, winded road, right? But I'll try to make it short and sweet. So basically, as I said, I came back home after spending some time in the U.S. and after hearing that about how hard it could be as a law student to go abroad, I decided to start another degree on international relations. So I thought, well, maybe this other degree will help me a little better. But my parents were like, hey, you're not allowed to drop out of law school. So I continued doing both at the same time, which was a lot of work, but it was definitely an interesting time of life. And because of the possibilities I had to, do exchanges and do all kinds of things, it did give me a nice sense of what I could be doing with my career. And then I started going into the world of LLMs in the US. So soon after I kind of learned about this whole world of things, the pandemic hit. And then all lawyers were online. A lot of people were online. The admissions departments of the universities were online. So I was seeing some of my colleagues doing different projects online, trying to do interviews about something they were interested on. And I thought, well, maybe this is the best opportunity I'll get to talk to people who built an international career, who got a law degree in one country, continued in another one. So I started a podcast interviewing people I had previously met in person, asking, how do you become a lawyer in your country? So I had friends from different parts of the world that I had met, in a summer school that I've done in South Africa or in another event I've attended before. So I started kind of getting together all of those networks and interviewing them and asking, how do you become a lawyer in your country? And then after a couple of those episodes, I'm like, I should ask some, Brazilians who are practicing law abroad as like their second jurisdiction. How does that work? And kind of grew into this project of understanding how different states, how different regulators let you do that, right? All of that in mind made me really think about going to the US and doing an LLM in the US. So I continued on pursuing that, got the opportunity to intern with a judge in the US. So I was really like with that mindset of going there afterwards. It so happened that by 2022, I was about to graduate law school, just in my last year. And one of my professors approached me. We were working at the pro bono clinic together. He knew a little bit about what was going on in my educational life. And he was like, why don't you start a master's degree? Because usually we can, do all the coursework in the first year, and then the second year you just write your dissertation. So you could, finish all the coursework together with your law degree, and then the next year you just write your dissertation. And then as I looked into it, I saw that my university had a few different agreements with universities across the world, but it was also open to other possibilities. And I learned about one of those possibilities was to come to Canada and do some research here. So I was specifically researching the regulation of sanitation and doing a little bit of a historical comparative analysis of that. And then I was able to contact a professor here in Canada and got him to be my supervisor. So I came here as a researcher. And then, with a couple of months here, I ended up meeting the person who would then, become my wife and all of that. So it was greatly a personal story after all of why I ended up, changing those plans and turned into Canada instead of the US, which was my first choice of jurisdiction. But life just ended up bringing me to Canada afterwards. And it was a great choice. I'm really enjoying it here.
Very cool. Very cool. So, if I may ask, about some of those interviews that you've had, can you tell us about some jurisdictions, perhaps the most difficult jurisdiction that you can become licensed in, based on some of those conversations you've had?
Yeah, it was so interesting, honestly, to see really just how different it is from one place to the other, right? So just to name a few different countries here, I learned that in South Korea, you need your law degree, and then you have a 4-day bar exam with a very low pass rate. So it's really considered one of the very hard places to become a lawyer at. And then you go to other countries where you can't even take the bar exam if you're not a national. But beyond that, Japan also is very well known for a very low pass rate on their bar exam. They have an additional 1 year of training. So I saw also this idea of a few countries have either a bar exam or a training, but a few jurisdictions like Ontario is one of them. You have 2 bar exams and then plus some like time of articling, right? Almost a year there, 8 to 10 months. Other places like Germany, it also becomes really hard because you have your whole law degree, then you have 2 well-known tough bar exams, and then you have another 2 years of a legal clerkship. So it really was interesting to see the different possibilities. And then even in the US, lots of the states wouldn't let you as a foreign attorney to come and take the bar exam. You would need to do a whole JD. A few states let you do it just with an LL.M, but most of the states actually require you to have a JD. So there's lots of different things that you need to take into consideration. And then in a few of the countries as well, like Brazil, it could become hard to become a lawyer there because you'd need to revalidate your degree, and then you need to take the bar exam in Portuguese, right? So you'd have to learn a whole new language on that. And those are just a few of like usual things, I guess, you could expect. But then we go, for example, to Chile, that is well known for having an oral degree exam. And then that kind of lets you practice law. So a very different route if you were to imagine to take a whole, a bar exam that is oral. And then in other jurisdictions like Bolivia, you can become a lawyer as soon as you finish your law degree. So you don't really have a bar exam like we're used to this structure. So it was just really interesting to
Very
see.
interesting. And I'm curious, does Bolivia have some sort of transfer program for lawyers who are already qualified outside of Bolivia and then they're coming there? Is it just an automatic, registration to become a lawyer? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't go deep into the research, and a lot of the interviews I did were with people who grew up there and
I see.
kind of knew how the process worked for people who were natives, but didn't really like know exactly how you would have to do it to become a lawyer if you were qualified in another jurisdiction.
Yeah, interesting. So Bolivia seems to be perhaps one of the easiest, um, but that assumes that their law school, is quite easy to pass. I know in some countries, getting into law school is actually easy. For example, in France, I think everyone's guaranteed a spot if you apply, but most people fail their first year. And so they filter out lawyers through the university process. And so they make it challenging at that point. I don't know what the licensing process is like there. But I'm curious, do you know of any jurisdictions where it seems to be very easy for foreign trained lawyers to move to?
Yeah, so it's my impression that a few jurisdictions make it easier in the sense that you don't need to do a long process, and maybe you don't need to like requalify completely. So I've seen and talked with a few lawyers who are currently working in the Middle East, and what seems to be the case is that especially if they are UK trained or North America trained, and especially if they are working with like solicitor work, they don't really need to do much, right? They do have some kind of special license to work in the country and within a couple of corporations where they don't need to go through an extensive renovation. But they are not. They're mostly working with corporate matters. They're not going and arguing before a criminal court or something along those lines.
That's right. That's right. So they're working kind of commercial type projects or contract law and stuff like that. I've heard that as well. That there's no actual regulatory body, I think, for lawyers, right? A little bit like the Wild West, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm sure it won't last long, right? That's an interesting thing that we've learned more and more with the years, is that as we see like big amounts of people going to a region, and especially if they have a specific profession, there's definitely a care of the state to regulate that and protect public interest in a way, but also protect the profession and all of that.
Yeah. Um, so I guess what prompted this entire project and podcast was, your passion for, being abroad, studying internationally, living internationally. But it seems like we've hooked you now. Canada has hooked you in with a nice love story, which is very nice. How would you compare Canada, based on the conversations that you've had in terms of level of difficulty? I'm curious to see how Canada rates, given that Canada is known for welcoming immigrants, being a very immigrant-friendly country. Do you think the licensing process for foreign-trained lawyers, matches that impression perhaps that some people might have?
Oh, that's a good question, and I feel like there's a lot of like details and wrinkles to this, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, I would say that like for one thing at least, the process is very streamlined, and at this day and age, you go into it knowing what to expect, right? So maybe if you were to go to another jurisdiction that is less well known for welcoming immigrants and for having people coming from other places, you don't just Google it or put it on YouTube and you see 20 people talking about it and saying how it works, and then you see all these people talking about their experience and how to go about it. So I do believe that like Canada has this advantage where the process is clear enough and well known enough where, you know, if you just Google it up how to become a lawyer in Canada with a foreign degree, you find, you know, tons of sources of information. And I think that in the end, it's really important to have that possibility of knowing all of that. With that being said, it's interesting, you know, that, you know, my colleagues from who studied in the UK or even who studied in the US, they do have to take a couple of courses that basically there's a few different routes, right? But one of the routes could be, you know, going and taking courses of subjects that maybe they are already well familiarized with, or you know, a few different prerequisites of, you know, studying in person in Canada that are very interesting. And I'm sure there's some reasoning that was put behind that. Um, so I would say it's a median in the sense of like it's not a very hard jurisdiction. It's also not, you know, impossible, or it's also not really easy. You do have to put a lot of effort. You do have to put, you know, a significant financial commitment. It's also a significant time commitment. So I would say it might rate like in the middle, where there's not a restriction that you have to be a citizen of the country, but at the same time, you do have to go through a very structured process to get through it.
We've evolved. There used to be such requirements, um, both in Ontario, I know in BC as well, and perhaps other jurisdictions, but there used to be such requirements that you be a citizen.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware.
So things have changed, and but I think you mentioned, you know, there's a significant cost element here, and in your background, of course, you were a practicing lawyer. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I got the chance to practice for a year. Not as a lawyer per se, I was a clerk at a court.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the chance to, you know, do a clerkship under a judge and all of that, and
Mm-hmm.
got the chance to experience lawyering from the other side of the table in some
Mm-hmm.
extent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. But yeah, I mean, similar to other stories where there are, you know, um, lawyers who have experience, but they come to Canada and then they have to go through this process, which could take several years to get into. I guess one of the nice things about the Canadian process is that, you know, you're starting at the high level. So with the Federation of Law Societies of Canada, you're applying through their standing committee called the National Committee on Accreditation, and the nice thing about that is that you don't have to physically be present in Canada to start that process. Where if you do qualify to write those examinations, these are self-study examinations for the most part. There are many ways to accomplish those assignments, but you can take those exams from your home country. And so you can continue working, you can, you know, practicing law in whichever country you're in while simultaneously completing at least the first stage of this process, so that when you arrive in Canada, you can hit the ground running. And I think that that may put Canada at an advantage, as opposed to some other jurisdictions when I don't think you can do those pre-qualification things in your home country. And that could save you a lot of time and money where you're not working and you're studying, and you're coming to Canada. But perhaps for another conversation, perhaps, you know, on a study of law abroad, around the world episode, we can get into those details of the licensing process. But what I really wanted to get into with you, you know, aside from your study of law around the world project, you undertook a new project during your master's program, and I thought this was a brilliant project. I thought it's a really inspirational project because I know how difficult it is for a non-Canadian to break into the legal market. And the project you titled is 75 Lawyers, 75 Stories. Where the number 75 come from, And I understand you actually spoke and interviewed more than 75 lawyers, so we'll get to that. But what's this idea of 75 lawyers, 75 stories? How did that come about?
Hmm. Yeah, so to start it off, right, as you mentioned, I'm a student at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Law, and the Faculty of Law just turned 75 years. So the number was very much inspired in that special anniversary that the law school was having here. And the inspiration came from a few different things, right, to get started with this project. So in probably our second or third week of the program, there was a 75th anniversary gala, and all the alumni, or a great amount of alumni, gathered together at the university and gave speeches and did the traditional law follies, where it's basically stand-up comedy, lots of different activities and all of that. And it was very nice to see like a very human side of the lawyer alumni. And then at the time, I didn't even register quite well who was there, what they were. But then I soon came to realize that we had, diplomats, former Supreme Court justices, all of those people were showing a very human side of them. And that night, I got a very strong feeling that, I want to connect to this alumni network. These are awesome people, and I loved seeing their sense of humor, and they just seemed like genuinely cool human beings to be around. And then I was thinking, how do you go about that, right? How do you just kind of cold call people? How does that work? So that was kind of part one. And then part two, something that I've done a lot over the years was being quite active on LinkedIn. So I've, connected with a lot of people over the years, and then with my aspirations of going to the US, ended up connecting to a lot of American lawyers, American law students, and all of that. And with all that taken into consideration, I've noticed that there's somewhat of a common thing, semi-common thing, where law students are recommended to meet with 100 lawyers over their 3 years of law school. And then a lot of them would share those experiences over LinkedIn, saying, hey, this week I met with 3 lawyers. These are the key things that I learned meeting with them. These are the insights I got. And I'm like, hey, I think I can put this together, reproduce this, meet with, this 75 lawyers representing and celebrating the 75 years of UofT, and also having this experience of, meeting with a lot of lawyers over a short period of time that I'm a student, and that I feel like there's an advantage of being a student, right? The legal community very much, in my personal experience, feels a desire to give back and to guide and mentor the next generation. So even the busiest people, or many of them, will give a couple of minutes to talk with you, to give you a piece of advice. And I kind of put two and two together, and then I thought, let me put this out in the world and say, hey, this is what I'm gonna do, right? I, I'll be honest, I was a little concerned that the university would say, hey, you can't use our name for that, like take that down. And soon I got an email from somebody who worked at the university, and I'm like, okay, that's what's gonna happen. They'll ask me to stop, to not use the university name. But actually it was the other way around. I got an overwhelming amount of support, and they were like, hey, let's do something with that. I was like, hey, what else are we doing to celebrate the 75 years of the university? There's a lot of events going on. Can we do something else? So then it became a project that we knew from the beginning would turn into a booklet that was just recently launched. So I got to talk with all these lawyers, and then get a quote from each of those conversations, and now we have a booklet with that kind of community knowledge. And those quotes are based basically on the question of, um, if you could give a piece of advice to the next 75 years of lawyers who graduate from U of T, what would you tell them? And then that's where we started.
That's incredible. The entire story and experience must be incredible. Um, yeah, as an internationally trained lawyer, I understand how difficult it is to network in the Canadian, market. Typically because Canadian law students, they have 3 years of university, they have their colleagues, the hundreds of students in their class that go out and end up articling somewhere, working somewhere, and they can reach out to those students. But you're coming from a place where you only have your, LL.M class, which I assume is a limited space, but you went out of your comfort zone. I assume it's out of your comfort zone to reach out to these people. And it seems as though you've got a network that's larger than 100 lawyers now. Um, so good on you. I think that's fantastic. And that's why I wanted to highlight this story, because I think it's an incredible story. And I think people can do similar things to what you've done. They don't necessarily have to copy your idea of a podcast. But they need to do something different and stand out. And I don't think that was your initial intention, but I think it's a great way to create a network for yourself, to meet lawyers, and most importantly, to learn from them, which you've now compiled into a book. I don't know if you have the book nearby, but I'd love to hear some of the top tips maybe that you've received. What are some of the top tips you may have received from some of the more senior lawyers or even junior lawyers? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't mind me, just before going into that, I must say that I came from a very like lucky in some senses of the word experience, where first I came to Canada as a researcher, and then I was at Osgoode Hall Law School, so I got to participate in the JD seminars. I got to be a little bit living that law school life, and that gave me an introduction to a network. I soon learned about the Brazil Canada Bar Association, BCBA, and that also gave me another layer of professionals that I could rely on, that gave me a lot of information. So definitely I feel like I was lucky on starting at a good place, right? Where I got to meet quite a few people who are willing to give me information on what the next steps are. So I definitely started at that good spot. I didn't feel like I had to start like from scratch or from zero in a way, which was quite an advantage, when deciding which school to go to for an LLM and all of that. Just to think about a few things, right? But then going into your question of like what some people said that was very interesting. I think there's quite a few. There's like quite the range, right? There's people who told me about hard skills and things that you actually have to like physically do, and then all the way to other people that told me specifically about like, hey, do you want to be in-house? You have to do X, Y, Z. This is a good way to go about it. Um, a few specific things here, just to mention a few. So I did talk to one of the JDs who's working out in the Middle East now, Muhammad Ansab, and his thing was a lot about keeping an open mind. He shared with me his experience about going through law school in Canada, and then he went to California and then got to go to the Middle East, and he never had planned any of that. It kind of just happened because he kept an open mind and kept looking for better possibilities and better outcomes that he could get. So like, to quote him specifically, he said, you might start out thinking you know exactly where you want to go, but life often takes unexpected turns. Opportunities show up when you least expect them. The world is changing fast and it's more connected than ever. So stay curious, ask questions, and be open to things that don't fit your original plan. So there was a lot of this kind of career advice that I thought it was just so nice, because it was beyond just double read emails before sending them out, or something very
Which you should do. You should still do.
absolutely, you should absolutely, but you might find or infer that you should do that before talking to 75 people, right? So I thought that was kind of like the rich part of it, getting some information that maybe you wouldn't get otherwise. Or YJ, who's a CEO of a law firm, who also said, finding your place in law takes time. So if you follow the work assigned to you without ever sitting in front of a client or learning how to bring business, you will be limiting your own potential. So there's just a few things that maybe we don't think right away, and especially as young associates starting out, we might be eager to help and do whatever we have to do. But then when we hear those things, it just might um, spark some other ideas of what we want to be looking into doing with our career and with things that really could add value and make the most out of this experience. Ben Isco as well, who's a partner at Dentons, he said, one of my favorite quotes in the booklet, he said, "Don't lose sight of the basics you learned in kindergarten. Be kind, respectful, and listen to others." So there's just a lot of things that were really fun to listen to, and they were just like, hey, just keep on with the basics and that will take you very far.
Yeah, that's lovely. How do we get a hold of this booklet? That's the next question I've got for you.
No, that's a good one. So the Faculty of Law has a magazine called Nexus. So if you just Google Nexus UofT Law, and then you click on the current issue, the first thing you'll see is the booklet. So you can find that right away, and I can even provide you with a link that you can put on the description if you don't mind.
Absolutely. We'll definitely put the link in the description. I'd also, with your permission, I'd love to put the link to Study Law Around the World, but also your podcast, 75 Lawyers, 75 Stories. I think a lot of people will find that interesting. I really want to thank you. First of all, it was a pleasure speaking to you and getting to know more about your story. I think I've learned a lot. I hope that students have learned something from this. I know you said a lot of it was luck, but I disagree. I think you've taken a lot of initiative. You've done a lot of things, stuff we haven't even spoken about today, but things like being part of the Graduate Law Students Association. I know you're involved in a lot of extracurricular. You seem like that A-type personality. But even if you're not, you really have to put yourself out there. And you have to do things a little bit differently. And I think you've done that, and I want to commend you for that. And I know that you're going to be going, places, and I hope you remember some of us little people down here when you get up there. Don't forget the small people, and be sure to say hello. And I look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Well, same goes my way. So thank you so much for taking an interest and taking the time to listen to my story. First of all, I know you're a busy man, got lots of classes to teach and lots going on with family and all of that. So I really appreciate your time. Appreciate the chance to share a little bit more about my story with you and to amplify this story as well. I hope I can give it back as well in many ways. So I hope that by participating in this kind of engagement, I can also return a little bit of the favor that all these lawyers did to me by sharing their time with me. And I'm just really appreciative of your project and your entrepreneurship as well. It's just amazing to see, good people putting out resources out in the world. And I'm just a big fan of people that do that and take initiative. So also, thank you for keeping up with business. That's amazing, and the world needs more of it.
Thank you. And it was great having you.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Take care, Claudio.